He reported himself that the movement and pounding could drive a man crazy. He said it was rather like telephoning while standing on a dodgem at a fair. I think that was the understatement of the year when you look at those shots. Well, somewhere in the middle of that lot, rather a contrast, isn't it, from that man alone on that rocking, lurching, tossing vessel going around Cape Horn, to move ahead and see him now. These peaceful waters on a really lovely, calm, quiet, warm evening, coming home to Plymouth. Sir Francis who within 2 days of leaving Sydney, you may remember, something quite big going out to sea there, Commander Villiers.
Oh, well, that's a Royal Fleet Auxiliary ship just lying at anchor there inside the breakwater. I don't think she's going out. She's been there all the afternoon. She's just lit up, I think, to add a little light to the occasion. Sir Francis comes quietly in with all his sails down. Now it's difficult to pick out the Gypsy Moth, but when you pick up that wind vane that he steered by, and which proved so effective on the passage home, and when you pick that up, it's the only way they can recognize the Gypsy Moth now.
Actually, I think Sir Francis would describe himself not so much an adventurer or explorer, but more of a navigator. And Derek Kelsall, of course, having sailed across the Atlantic single-handed, knows about the problems of navigation. This, apart from the seamanship, Derek, and also the mental and physical problems, this really is a tremendous exercise in navigation.
Yes, it gives one a tremendous sense of satisfaction to make one's landfall at the end of a trip like this that has taken so long and covered many, many thousands of miles. Other things I would like to mention here is that on this kind of trip, things that really are important is to have a boat in which one has confidence, and of course the thing that made this possible at all is the self-steering gear. If you have a boat that will steer itself under all conditions, this is as good as having another man aboard. Of course, a good deal of credit to this should go to Colonel Blondie Hassler, who invented this very handy piece of equipment.
Chichester, of course, in poor physical and mental shape when he arrived in Australia, did criticise Gypsy Moth quite strongly, and conversions were made out there by Warwick Hode. But in fact, it may well have been that being tired and slightly dispirited at missing the target and having had trouble over the last 7 days, he was more critical at that stage than he might well have been in other circumstances. But there's no doubt at all that he's enjoying himself at this moment. We saw some champagne being loaded aboard the C&C's launch that went out to meet him, and it rather looked to me then as if he's enjoying having that. Of course, it's not the first time he's had champagne on this trip by any means. He did report that during February and his 30th wedding anniversary, he was going to put on his velvet smoking jacket and enjoy some champagne cocktails. In fact, it wasn't possible to put the jacket on, but what he did do was enjoy the champagne cocktails, although he said it was very difficult to stand up at the time in very rough seas. This man is, of course, the supreme navigator. Had a wonderful life, full of adventure, almost a professional soloist. Apart from being the second man to fly solo from England to Australia in that Gypsy Moth, back in 1929, he embarked on what many people consider to be a quite impossible flight, almost suicidal, from New Zealand to Australia to become the first man to fly across the Tasman Sea. In order to do this, of course, he couldn't really do the whole thing in one hop, and there was nothing he could do about getting extra petrol and fuel supplies on the Gypsy Moth that he flew. So by supreme navigation, he had to find the right islands at the right time, and I think Commander Villiers would agree, as a feat of navigation, that ranks with this one.
Well, indeed, it's far ahead. I remember at the time, everybody was not just thought, but they were absolutely certain that it was a fantastic thing even to try to leave New Zealand and fly into the Pacific and pick up not just one, but two pinpoints of little islands that could have been hidden in a single rainfall, and he'd go by and that would be the end of Sir Francis Chichester, but he found both islands and went on to Australia.
Anyway, he's arrived in triumph on other occasions on that first solo flight of his from England to Australia, also the crossing of the Tasman Sea, also on the first leg of this voyage to Australia, but I don't think that at any stage in this astonishing career he can have had a welcome like this. The crowds can now see him. Gypsy Moth hasn't got very far to go to the mooring. Although he reported a week ago that he felt he'd lost his sense of balance, although he's still at sea, he looks pretty solid out there now.
He looks very fit and happy indeed. At the moment, I think he's just stopped out there and taking it easy and getting his ship properly ship-shaven, the sails properly secured, and being photographed. I don't know that that's a very important thing to him. But he's getting ship-shape and Bristol fashion to come up to the buoy in a proper manner, just like the seaman he is. Nobody's got him in tow as far as we can see. He's just sitting there. He'll come along as soon as she's all ship-shape.
Let's have a check now on how far he's got to go. The Royal Western Yacht Club, we go out now towards Gypsy Moth, which gives you some idea about how far he's got to go. He's got about 300 yards left. Incidentally, when Chichester sets foot on land once more, having been greeted by the Lord Mayor of Plymouth, he's then going to make his way in the special car that's been provided by a sailing enthusiast for him, make his way through the streets of Plymouth to the Guild Hall, where he's due to meet the press about half an hour after he arrives at the Guild Hall. There should be a special press conference. Whether it will proceed, of course, will be Chichester's own decision. A small room's been provided for him there. He's going in there to rest. But it's hoped that he will appear before the press of the world, and believe me, Plymouth and the surrounding areas packed with pressmen and television reporters and cameramen. There is expected to be several hundred in the Guild Hall. He should appear before them within 15 minutes to half an hour of arriving at the Guild Hall. Rather looks from that shot as if he might well be in tow.
I think he is in tow now. He's ready to come up to the buoy, and one of the launches, probably the Queen Harbour Martin's launch, has got a hold of the Gypsy Moth, and he's coming in quietly to his moorings, while he's still continuing to get that deck nice and ship-shape and everything properly secured. You see, again, those rust marks are pretty considerable. But indeed, they might well be, because an awful lot of sea has gone past that ship in the last 9 months, and quite enough has gone over the side, too. I think it's a fitting thing that he should be coming into Plymouth, into this historic sound where so many great seamen have come and have sailed from Drake and before Drake, and Frobisher and all the rest of them, and Captain James Cook going to Australia with the old Endeavour, and again with the Resolution out to the Antarctic and the Arctic, and the great seaman Lord Anson with his fleet bound round the Horn. He lost 4 of his 5 ships. All these men know this sound. The proper place for the end of a great voyage like this. In all our sea story, nothing quite like this has ever happened before. It's a wonderful occasion and a great voyage. Ah, here he comes along in the last of the lights. Another few minutes. And then a different kind of voyage starts, or a different kind of ordeal anyway. The Lord Mayor is waiting in his robes on the waterfront there in front of the yacht club. The Admiral, C&C of the port, the cheers raised on the hoe from the, looks like 100,000 people up there. Now the place is absolutely flat with them. And at last, their long wait up there in the rain and wind of this morning and the quiet of this afternoon, their long wait is very well worthwhile. Here comes that slim, white, long racing yacht. I would say myself, speaking as a seaman, that if you wanted to pick the most difficult vessel to handle by yourself and to take down into the Roaring Forties and bring around the Horn, that's it. That's it, but she's done it.
All ready now to take Sir Francis off Gypsy Moth, and at the Guild Hall, the naval escort are preparing for the arrival of Sir Francis. That's where the press conference will take place. He was a bit worried himself, of course, about when he got back on dry land, about his own sense of balance and whether he'd lost it completely. He's got a rather awkward set of steps to get up when he gets out of the small launch that will bring him alongside the steps of the Royal Western Yacht Club. Where, incidentally, the night before he left, I'm told he had a marvellous party. In fact, when he went out the next day, he wasn't in very good shape at all, but he certainly enjoyed himself before he went out, and I should think when he settles down once more here, he's going to enjoy himself again. A man who enjoys his life to the full, a man of strong opinions, but as he said himself, Gypsy Moth, and there's never been any prospect of that, could never be a dry ship.
Well, a few yards more, and then he comes ashore to the tumult and the shouting, and after a few days gets on quietly with writing what I hope is going to be a really wonderful book. He's got a marvelous story to tell, and he's the man to do that too. I must say, there were times when I was worried, very worried about all this, and I am very happy to be here and to see the Gypsy Moth come in. Chichester said that he was going to sail out to Australia on the way of the route of the square-rigged ships, and he was going to make it in about 100 days, and he got out there, nearly finished, and he said, well, I'm going home, and I'm going home no matter who says what. And I will try to get home in about 115, 110 days. And he very nearly did that too. He missed just by a few days. But his voyages, his 2 passages, his voyage has been as good as the average of those great big windjammers with crews of 30 to 40 people and with good watchkeeping officers and with 300-foot water lines. They could make 12, 13, 14 knots. His maximum was about 7.5. His best day's run could be about 180 miles. They could do 300 miles and more, and the Clippers more than that. But he's still done what he's set out to do. Out in 107 and back in 119 days. A jolly good show.
The famous Plymouth Sound, at this moment, a sight to remember. As all this great convoy of small ships surround Gypsy Moth. Must be 200 or 300 in the Sound. It really is a memorable sight. Cars that await the official party. The Gypsy Moth now lying at rest and almost still for the first time since he left Sydney at the end of January. Looking at the boat, it's quite astonishing to recall that within 48 hours of leaving Sydney, Gypsy Moth and Sir Francis were in trouble. The boat was knocked down, flat, he said, so flat that there are still pieces of glass in the ceiling in the small cabin in which he's lived. The cabin, in fact, he's had a living space for the past 4 months that measures 8 feet by 4 feet. Alan Villiers was making the point about Gypsy Moth not being very easy to sail from his point of view. He had a graphic way of describing it. He said you need a man to navigate, an elephant on the tiller, and a chimpanzee with arms 8 feet long to work down below. But although he's had these moments of description, when it might be thought that he's criticized Gypsy Moth, I've no doubt that as he looks back on this unique voyage, Gypsy Moth the Fourth will be a boat that he'll remember with enormous affection.
I'm sure he will do that. When he was thrown in the Tasman Sea, just a few days after leaving Sydney, and when Sir Francis left Sydney, according to the information I had from good friends in the Royal Sydney Yacht Club and so on, he was still in pretty bad shape. And out he went. He knew that he had to sail then, or, of course, face delay in getting past the Horn. And the longer he was delayed, the worse the weather built up there. The autumn was coming on, winter after that. And so off he went, straight out of into the Tasman Sea. Now, that Tasman Sea is a pretty awful place, wide open to the Antarctic in the south, and with coral sea cyclones in the north. And when he sailed, there was a good Antarctic storm coming up, and a coral sea cyclone coming down from the north. And he got an awful hammering, and his ship was flung right over on her side, flung down on her beam ends. Well, that was a supreme test, and the sea was over her, and the sea broke in the forehatch, and the sea was washing around down below us. He could do nothing. She either righted herself then, or else. That was the end of it. Well, she was a properly designed job. It had 6 feet more of a keel put on her in Sydney, which was a good thing, adding to the stability of John Illingworth's design and Camper and Nicholson's strong ship. And up she came. But then, and I was very pleased to read this when I read his next dispatch that was published in the Times, that he had decided to go round the north of New Zealand and not to follow the old square rigger tracks, the south of New Zealand or through Cook Straits, to get up north of 40, where he would have perhaps a little more of a peaceful run, and instead of force 10 and 11 storms, maybe only force 8 or 9. And by the grace of God, it worked out that way, and it lengthened his passage towards the Horn, but he kept on going. There was about 55 days to the Horn, which, for a vessel with a 38-foot waterline, was pretty good. And he got past Cape Horn, and there he is now.
So Sir Francis now all ready to leave the boat that's been his home now for 4 months. That's the police launch. It's just moved up towards the yacht club steps. Lady Chichester going aboard now, and it rather looks, I think it's Sir Francis is just ahead of her, hidden there by the one of the men aboard the small launch. In fact, the sea couldn't be calmer at this moment. It's a very, very peaceful night, still warm. Really perfect night on which to return. Just taking a look at Gypsy Moth, it's just possible in odd moments to see the Perspex panels in the cabin roof, which were provided for him to be able to lie in his bunk and see the dials of various instruments working and see what was happening outside. Almost a Mediterranean scene here tonight. Lights on all these small ships, and even more actually joining them. They're still coming. You can see lights moving out of the far distance. And this, in fact, shouldn't be a very difficult maneuver. Sir Francis now is only about 40 yards from the yacht club steps.
Oh, he has no problems now, except, of course, to accept the adulations and the great congratulations of the multitude. And that's something that Sir Francis, well, he can take that in his stride too when he has to, and he has to now. I think he's rather taking it easy coming in here. Oh, very sensible fellow too. I can hear he's coming alongside. The water here is quiet. It's the top of high water. The conditions are perfect. The vessels are able to lie still without any risk of collision. This is a fantastic occasion. Another of the miracles in Sir Francis Chichester's life, like finding Lord Howe Island and finding Norfolk Island and hitting that cable when he was coming into land in Japan and didn't see the cable and almost died but didn't, and like picking up the pieces of his aeroplanes time after time and putting them together again and flying on flights that he really shouldn't have made, and yet he made them. And in his transatlantic single-handed races, those passages of his are under 35 days. He wanted to do it in 30, but 35 days was considered a pretty good sailing ship passage to windward across the Western Ocean from the Channel to New York. And he made it at last in 30 days. All those were fantastic. But his voyage now out to Australia in that racing yacht and home again, that was miraculous. And tonight is a fitting end to that wonderful voyage here with this quiet water where usually there can be a tumult of tide, and where just this morning the rain was streaming down and the wind blowing in and the conditions were very miserable indeed. Now it's peace and quiet apart from the cheering for this good old friend and wonderful seaman and great aviator, and this man who has inspired us all because he has shown that in this really troublous sort of world nowadays, there is still something that the individual can do if he's got the guts enough to go and do it.
The small boats paying court to Gypsy Moth. But still no sign of Sir Francis yet, wanting to come ashore. Fleece launch in the foreground, circling rather anxiously at the yacht club steps. People becoming curious to know what's the reason for the delay, because everything's gone so smoothly so far, apart from the unexpected turnaround as he crossed the breakwater. I ought to tell you really, I don't want to stress it too much, but I ought to tell you really just how remarkable these pictures are at this moment, because it really is quite dark outside. I don't think there's a fire going on out there. I think it's a flare. And there's no shortage of flares around Plymouth Hoe either. Fireworks as well. Rather looks as if that light's just picking up some of the exhaust smoke on one of the motors of the small boats.
Sir Francis could be having a shave out there. After all, he probably hasn't had much chance to shave himself over the last 119 days. And he's a casual chap. I wouldn't be surprised if that isn't what he's doing right now.
In fact, it's just interesting to recall that he thought when he crossed the line that it was time he had a haircut for the occasion, and which he did, which must have been a very interesting operation, a one-man haircut like that. Derek Kelsall, did you ever try to cut your hair while you were at sea by yourself?
No, I can't say I did. No.
But he has made the point several times that it's rather important from his own point of view to maintain standards while he's out there, and standards of self-discipline. And he's always looked after himself extremely well during these long trips. And he did say that before he came in, he would clean himself up and so on, and also clean Gypsy Moth up.